you set this up, it's always like, did you just get that notification?
Yeah. I clicked leave meeting, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
We're not really live, right?
You know, I think we are actually.
Oh.
So that works out. So we're going to go ahead and I guess get started a little early today, if that is fine with everyone here. Yeah, we can always edit. Admittedly, we did go early about 8 minutes, and this is completely my fault. But I will take the hit for it. So welcome everyone to another edition of the community office hours for the CDK for Terraform. So today we've got a number of things for you, specifically the 0.8 release. And then after that, we're going to go into a year in review for the 2021, just what's happened in the CDK and what's going on. But before we get into that and dive into our main topics, we do need to cover our community guidelines. So be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient at all times. Be considerate, be respectful, and be professional. All of that should be obvious, right? But just in case, we'll drop the community guidelines in the chat. But since I started about 8 minutes early, I have a feeling our moderator is going to be a little bit behind. So please don't go and violate all of those community guidelines in the next 7 minutes. Okay, moving on. So you've been to these community office hours before. You probably recognize the faces on here, but just in case, I figured we go and do some introductions. So I'm going to pop over to Sarah MacDonald and have her introduce herself, even though I gave away her name. So I spoiled that.
Hi, yep, I'm Sarah MacDonald. I'm the product manager for CDK for Terraform, based out in Oregon. And yeah, excited to be here to talk about our year in review.
Let me go next. I just take over as with our stand-up kind of. It's a running gag to with Daniel at least. Yeah, my name is Ansgar. I'm an engineer on the CDK for Terraform team. And yeah, I think more specialized introductions have been made in previous community office hours. So this is a plug to watch those if you're interested in those boring details. And let me get it over or give it over to Daniel.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Daniel Schmidt. I'm from Hamburg, Germany, and been working on the team since May.
Alrighty. So as for our agenda today, so the first thing on our schedule is we're going to go through the new 0.8 release that came out 6 days ago, I believe. I know that there was a minor release that happened too, so I'm sure that we can dive into that. And then after that, as I said at the beginning, we're going to kind of go into a year in review. And there's going to be two parts to this that I think will be pretty interesting. And the first one is just, the CDK for Terraform. It's come a long way over the past year. At HashiCorp, we talked about it. At reInvent, it was everywhere. Two of our colleagues, Kyle Ruddy and Taylor Dolezal, had a very big talk in it. So big that not only did it fill up the whole 350-person room, but it overflowed into like 2 other rooms. So it was pretty nuts. And then I know we've got a demo on one of the big features that I believe Ansgar is going to do around the AWS adapter. And then we're going to end it on more of a soft discussion, which is just the perspective from the team. What's going on behind it, because behind every line of code, there is a human. Or is there? Well, there is in this case. And we'll get their perspective and see what their thoughts were. So first up, we have that 0.8 release. So I was wondering, Sarah, could you walk into what this release was, what the big themes of it were, and then just sort of, I wanted to get the thoughts of the team, both Ansgar and Daniel as well, around what went into this and what the main use cases for it were and the like.
Sure. So for 0.8, we took a slightly different approach than previous releases. So rather than have a big sort of headline focus. I think the product is getting mature enough now that there are some usability improvements that could generate a lot of user value. So rather than net new features, we just really focused in on some high priority, high value usability improvements. So I think like one that especially comes to mind was the work that Sebastian did. And Sebastian couldn't be here today, but he's another one of our engineers on the team. But did a lot of work to bundle our CLI dependencies and just like improve the speed and stability of the CLI, which, you know, is obviously foundational to the whole user experience. So I think that was kind of that's an example of the theme for this release, is just kind of focusing on those high priority improvements we could make. And, you know, Ansgar and Daniel had similar kind of projects they worked on that I think they could talk about a little bit as well.
What? Yeah, there we go. Ansgar, you won the
Yeah.
unmute first contest.
Beat Daniel to the race. No. So one thing that jumped into my mind was some internal change or bug fix kind of within the way we handle tokens and things that are passed to Terraform functions. And so this is quite abstract, and probably nobody encountered this yet because you need very weird code to run into those edge cases. But it happens that I wrote such weird code when working on the AWS adapter. So this actually fixed weird problem in the AWS adapter, and with it, the opportunity to use AWS step functions, but I will talk about that later. So that's the thing that jumps to mind for me as part of the 0.8 release. Internals that makes other things possible, kind of.
Yeah, and what we also did, specifically Sebastian did that, we added barrel imports for our namespace provider. So the AWS provider is quite huge in general, like a lot of resources. AWS does a lot of stuff. And we decided to improve the usability there. We put introduced the 0.7 namespaces so that when we compile these big providers out to different languages, we have like smaller parts of the code base in one file and smaller parts into one namespace, which is related to some TypeScript and JSI issue that then leads to better performance and also not throwing errors when using certain resources because they are just too many resources in one file. And that was quite cool and helped a lot there, but it added some unnecessary complex way of handling resources. So you always had to specify the namespace, and the migration from 0.6 to 0.7 was quite heavy in that regard. Like a lot of different imports need to be adjusted. Super, just didn't feel right. It's especially with like interfaces and so on. You have to do some type renaming and so on to make it really nice in the code base. So we decided to try to do it a different way, and we did barrel imports. So now if you have a namespace, for example, for IAM or something, you can just import the IAM namespace, use it as you did before, and be done with that. You don't have to go through the aws.iam.whatever route, which was a bit annoying.
Gotcha. So it sounds like then, excuse me, that the focus here was just sort of ironing out some of the different wrinkles that you'd experienced as a practitioner, but not only that, wrinkles that can cause some problems later on for future development, as Ansgar mentioned. Does that sound about correct?
Yeah, I think the idea is definitely, as the product kind of grows and matures, that we make sure it stays healthy along the way. So just kind of shoring up some of the existing like internals that Ansgar mentioned, and mechanics like the CLI and things like that, so that we have a good foundation to build on. And I think it felt like a good time for that at the end of the year, just to kind of do a release that was really focused on those kinds of improvements. So
nice. So this sort of we've kind of talked about this in passing, but I guess before we move on from the 0.8 release, because I know this is the final one of the year, did you all have any other big thoughts around it or what it may bring in the future? Because we talked about how we're trying to set up for the future, and obviously we're going to go back and take a look at the rest of the year. But before we do that, what is this setting you all up for as we move forward? Just as a like an in summary before we move on.
So now it's me first. Gotcha, Ansgar. So we wrote a lot of tests and test infrastructure to facilitate our provider generation, which is like the most fundamental part. It's kind of the API we expose for all the Terraform providers. So a lot of work went into this, and this will help us iterate on that stuff a bit faster and bring us up to speed on a lot of issues that we want to tackle on that front, long term, midterm. I think we have a special provider now that we just internally have, which is not really doing anything. It's just the schema for provider for all these edge cases that we encounter, and this is going to help us a lot to ship new features and be safe when we ship those features. Because the current test strategy was to build these providers, then like each bug choose a new provider to build, and that like iteration time should slow down by a lot. I think that will help us when we all tackle these provider issues.
Yeah, I get something else that kind of just pops to my mind. And Sarah mentioned that I think it was Sarah, that the work that Sebastian did, so the bundling of the CLI. And previously, and that is due to the NPM ecosystem and how packages or our CLIs install. We got weird issues that just fell from the sky, speaking like that. So whenever some package was updated upstream and it was a transition or transient dependency, and that's not directly our dependency, but from a package we include, and that doesn't have a fixed version range, then new users that would install the CLI would get a non-working version kind of, because something upstream was broken and we had no way to kind of stop this. So there are other ways with other problems, like using npm shrink wrap, I think, but bundling the CLI and putting everything into like single executable kind of, helps a lot with that. So we had a lot of issues that were like, okay, this wouldn't have happened if we had this already. And so I'm very glad about this being part of the 0.8 release, because this means that we don't have to spend time looking at dependencies or debugging things that fail upstream, because they fail for a lot of other users. Like we were always in a group of, other people building CLIs having the same issues here. Hi over there. We're also in the same boat. And this way we're like, okay, yeah, something failed. We won't upgrade yet, but in 1 or 2 days, it will be resolved and we can upgrade then. And then everything is all right. So we don't have to fix what 10 people are also fixing simultaneously. So that's something, brings me quite joy, as you can see.
Nice. Yeah, I've been in the land of trying to build a node CLI as well, and it is all npm shrink wrap, right? I mean, that's what Yarn was supposed to come in and save the day with, but anyhow, we probably don't want to go down that track of history. Anyhow, Sarah, did you have any other thoughts before we move backwards in time?
Yeah, I guess just to kind of summarize, I think what's really nice about the improvements that we focused on here is that they should make the first experience with the product more enjoyable and more sort of, accessible. I think the worst feeling, I can speak from experience, is like when you're new to a product and you try to use it and it doesn't work, and you kind of blame yourself because you're like, I just can't figure this out. Whereas in our case, like Ansgar mentioned, it might have been some upstream dependency that you as a user could never have figured out, that it wasn't your fault. So I think we just want to continue. I mean, even as in future releases, we'll go back to kind of more net new feature work. We just do want to continue to focus on like the core usability so that, folks can just jump in and start working without those kind of hiccups. So, yeah. Nice.
I always blame it on the other people first.
Oh, maybe that's a difference of personality. I always blame myself.
No, I'm not kidding actually, but no. Anyhow, yeah, great. Well, so that is our 0.8 release. A lot of setup for the future, a lot of things hammered out for some better usability going forward, both for the developers and for the practitioners moving forward. But before we go too deep into I guess we did sort of go into the future. We want to go back because as the CDK picks up more steam, and more traction, What we wanted to do is walk back through the features that you should know about. Because if you're just getting this, you know the basics of it, right? It's a CDK for Terraform. It's a way that you can provision your infrastructure using one of our supported programming languages, as opposed to going the normal route of writing an HCL. So if you're just getting into it, what we wanted to do is go through those critical features. So I figure, why don't we just sort of step back and begin with those, right? So we had the team go through and pick out the most important features. And obviously there was the 0.4 release, which is, I believe was the earliest release in 2021, correct? Yeah, but I don't see that on our agenda. But did anyone have anything from the 0.4 that they wanted to drop in here as a quick soundbite?
I think 0.4 was the one where we shipped Terraform assets, which are
assets. Yeah,
I think that was the 0.4 one. Assets are really powerful if you want to run stuff on Terraform Cloud, because assets copy your files over and deal with them in a way that if you run CDKTF deploy and use the Terraform Cloud Runner, it just uploads it all, and you don't have to really care anymore about where the file lies. You don't have to do manual file operations. So yeah, that's what they're for. Not super like, I don't know, interesting or great in itself, but a really foundational building block for higher order like constructs and level 2 constructs, level 2 constructs, and all that sort of stuff.
Nice. And what is it? I see that Go language support also was also a part of that release as well. So that was also
experimental support. We should.
Yeah,
That's connected to, I mean, our underlying library from JSII that Amazon maintains. It's still, Go is still under, like, I think either tech preview or experimental support, one of those two phrases. So we're looking forward to when JSII fully supports Go, but you can use it now. It's just experimental.
Nice. I guess I won't jump the gun on that one. Well,
I know we're all very excited about Go, but we have to wait a little bit longer.
all right, gotcha. Well, any I guess we won't spend too much time on 0.4. We'll go ahead and move on to 0.5, where we brought forth the convert command. I know that was a big thing that y'all want to talk about. I believe the watch command also came out in that release as well. But 0.5, Sarah, what was the big theme and focus here?
Well, 0.5 was released right before I joined the team. So I remember, as someone who was trying to, before, I had a little time between when I accepted the role and when I actually started, where I was kind of trying to frantically learn what the product was, and figure out, kind of what really just what it was. And the convert command was hugely helpful to me. So I didn't work on 0.5, but I definitely benefited from convert. So I think especially as a new user, or really just as any user who's familiar with the Terraform ecosystem, convert is really helpful because you can take, valid HCL and convert it into one of our programming languages. And so for me, like looking at the documentation, for example, like the AWS provider documentation in the registry, and then being able to kind of convert that into TypeScript, it kind of helped me start to form a mental model of how I would put together a CDKTF application. So that was my exposure to 0.5. Ansgar and Daniel, who actually worked on that release, can go into more detail, I'm sure.
Should we?
Yes, definitely.
That was your cue. Yeah.
Although I started first, as we've talked about convert, I think that's the stage for Daniel. So he built it, and he has to take the credit, and he has to show or talk about the details there.
If you want details, we have a great video for that. It's somewhere in our YouTube channel. Probably we can link that later somewhere.
Yeah, I'll drop that in the chat while you all discuss things.
That was the code, the pull request review style thing where we talked for 1.5 hours, and remember that
one of us ranting about or like discussing the details of what's actually going on there. So convert was a really interesting feature. I think it really helps to kind of bridge the gap between Terraform and CDKTF. It should help users to kind of get started. It should make all the documentation a bit more accessible. You can copy it in to convert and take what's out and work with that and speed up your development process. And you can also, if you have already a project and you now think, CDKTF might be the right thing for me right now, you can do CDKTF init, and with the from Terraform project flag, you can just start right off the bat with that. So that's really a handy feature, I think. It was really interesting to build as well. A lot of graphs and big JSON structures to go through. It was really interesting from a technical perspective as well. So if you're interested in graphs and parsing and all that stuff, and you want to see someone fail at that, just look at the video.
Which I did just drop into the chat for anyone who's interested. On that note, for the 0.5 release and the convert command, I wanted to go ahead and ask you a question that I got at reInvent. If y'all are ready right here for 500, if we're in jeopardy. Okay, so the question that I got was an interesting one, because here we just touched on it with the convert command, but I had someone ask about a case where they have a Terraform project written in traditional Terraform, right? And they want to move towards the CDK for Terraform. So they want to do a transition. Obviously, we just have raw HCL. We can use the convert command to make that happen. However, what he was curious about was what happened to the state file. If you want to move that state file over to the CDK for Terraform, what would that process look like?
Yeah, great question. So the convert command is not like it's not as good, or not as, it's really meant to be a little one-to-one translation. It's more of a conceptual translation, which has the effect that if you the process you would think would be possible is run init from the project, then move over your state file and run plan that nothing should change. But what you will see is all the identifiers of the resources will have a different name. And I know John was working on a PR to make it possible to make this one-of-one translation. You can also go in by hand and override all the Terraform identifiers of the different constructs you have to make it match, which is kind of some handwork. Or I think we have a new Terraform resource for moving the state currently being introduced. I forgot which release it was. So what you could also do is you could plan the new one, see what the identifiers are, and move the state, move your Terraform state first. So in your HCL, you make the move to the new identifiers that are going to be there, and then you move the file over, and then you could work with CDKTF. I think that would be the easiest way, but we don't handle that automatically for you just yet.
Yeah, for currently, but as soon as we support the move operation in some way, we could also generate those probably, but that's not what works now, but might work.
Yeah, definitely. If that's something you're interested in, your project is too big to make this like a handwritten exercise, drop us a note, leave an issue there, and we kind of see if we can help there. We want to get folks over from Terraform who are interested and would benefit from CDKTF, so definitely would help more than just you. We'd love to hear your use case.
Nice, nice. So there is a process that does require a little bit of elbow grease on the practitioner's part, but it is there. Everything that you need to get done is there. But I have a feeling we'll get a request or an issue from it that hopefully we can look into. Thank you for the answer. Well, before we move on from the 0.5 release, were there any other things that anyone had thoughts on? All right, well, I will take your silence as a no, and we will move on to the 0.6 release. So Sarah, so we can get into a flow here, will you introduce us to the 0.6 and sort of what the theme was and the like?
Sure. So yeah, 0.6 had a few exciting kind of headlines, including TypeScript unit testing with Jest, as well as improved handling for native Terraform functions and some shell completion improvements. So I think there's sort of I don't know if there's a unifying theme there, but there were a couple of exciting headlines to jump into. So I don't know if the team wants to talk about testing first or about functions, but I think the handling of native Terraform functions was an interesting improvement and definitely helpful for folks who we were just mentioning earlier, like used to working with an established Terraform project and kind of coming into the CDK world. So yeah, I don't know, Ansgar or Daniel,
Yeah,
do you want to chat about?
I could go.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely with Terraform functions, the elbow grease you mentioned earlier was really coming in. So it's a lot of manual work to translate over what we have in Terraform world to CDKTF, a lot of copying the documentation and finding all the functions we support. It's like really a lot of functions and making sure they work with every single input that's there. It's definitely interesting improvement, and it was really helpful to close out some issues that were just related to using functions or that could be solved with functions more easily. So I think that's really helpful. Bit of a bummer, like JSI doesn't support generics. And for that reason, some of the functions don't have don't have the syntax highlighting or the auto-completion they could have had. For example, if you take an element of a list or something, we could have shown you like what properties to get from that element and do some magic there. Or if you do use the lookup function to inspect an object and go into properties of that object, we can't really show you any nice, these are the properties you have at your disposal and so on, helpers. But yeah, nevertheless, I think it's really helpful to work around issues that we have and also to move over from Terraform and make use of that functions.
Yeah, those add a lot of capabilities to you when you're building with it. Ansgar, did you have any thoughts?
No, I think Daniel already covered it.
Yep.
Yeah, Ansgar did a lot of work on proofreading everything.
But only releases later, things popped up.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that was. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Ansgar if he wants to talk about unit testing, but
yeah, that would be good. How about it, Ansgar?
Yeah, taking credit for something that also Daniel built, but nevertheless, I know what it is about. So yeah, we introduced jest-based unit testing. So we added some helpers and some jest matchers. So matchers are like utilities you can use to inspect your results of the CDK for Terraform constructs, for example, you build. So for example, I could build a custom construct that creates a VPC and also some subnets along with it. And I could use that and use the test helpers to say, okay, I've got this new construct, and then I can use expect my construct that's synthesized, and then to have resource, and then say, for example, AWS_VPC ID. And I think I can even pass the type of the resource rather than giving the identifier. So it's even more readable and idiomatic to use. And you can also inspect what's in those resources. So you could, for example, assert that the subnet also has the correct IDs and whatever you might test for your custom construct. So some utilities that help you in testing your constructs. And yeah, that's a nice thing to be able to do with them. Something to add from the others?
Yeah, I used it in the wild a few days ago. I built some demo I want to build for a longer time and used custom constructs so heavily to compose logic together and to have a bit bigger building blocks that were idiomatic to the problem at hand. And was quite some fun to kind of see the testing helpers in place, kind of just test is it isolated interaction between two constructs. In the end, I after writing all the tests, I just deployed and kind of worked. was kind of nice to get a bit more security, a bit faster iteration cycles out of that.
Yeah, and that's really big with you, especially if you're coming from development and you're used to that instant feedback loop. I just failed my snap there. That instant feedback loop, but you get an infrastructure, and that feedback loop kind of stretches out, right? Because we make a change of the code, and now we got to wait long time for the AWS or whatever cloud provider you want to do it. So all of these features, things like testing to shorten that, so you don't have to keep going back and up there. That's really big in terms of developer productivity, in my opinion. Yeah, any other thoughts on 0.6 before we move forward in time?
The only other thing I was going to add about the unit testing is that, currently, so the unit testing that we added with jest and snapshots and assertions is for people working in TypeScript. And it was really interesting to see that like some of our early pilot users were working in TypeScript, and one team in particular was already using jest and doing snapshots. And this was kind of the workflow that they had gone down because they were used to working in TypeScript, and this was kind of natural to them. So I think that's our goal as we look into providing testing support for testing workflows for other languages, is to find like what feels natural when you're working in Python, what feels natural in Java. So I just want to put it out there to anybody who's watching. If you use any of those languages and you want to share an issue with us or share a comment about, what type of testing framework would work for you in your preferred language, we just want to make sure that the workflows feel natural, for each language. So that's just a request from the community to kind of let us know as we plan for testing support for other languages in the future.
I did not know that part. I didn't know that it originated from a user feedback loop. That's pretty awesome. I thought it was like this is what gets used in TypeScript thoughts. We just pick it. So that's really neat to know.
It was probably a little bit of both. I don't think these are the only people using jest, but it was like a confirmation, to see that this was the workflow they'd already chosen, and it kind of let us know like it made sense. So
yeah, and you see that, everyone watching, the CDK Terraform team, they listen and they use it, as Daniel demonstrated in his talk about using and testing. So yeah, how about that? Okay, so moving forward onto the 0.7 release. So this release actually fell around the same time that HashiCorp happened. So we didn't get to do a community office hour. So not only are we going to talk a little bit about 0.7 here, but we also have a demo because I know that Ansgar and the team, they had a pretty neat thing that did get talked about at reInvent as well. And that was using both the CDK for Terraform and the AWS CDK together. So I'm really interested to see what's there. So Sarah, why don't you kick us off with the beginning here?
Sure. Yeah. So 0.7 was really exciting. I think we had a lot of excitement kind of building up to HashiConf and being able to release this. There are a couple of things I'll just run through. One project that I was really excited about, and I think we've already gotten great feedback from people about, is that we migrated and also put a lot of time and attention into our documentation in the 0.7 release. So if you were used to looking for our docs in our GitHub repo, you can now go to terraform.io, choose CDKTF, and all of our docs live alongside the rest of the Terraform tooling. And we had support from a really excellent tech writer here who helped us really improve and add a lot of like net new docs. So I think that was a really great sort of focus of effort in that release. There was also some great work that Daniel did to improve and kind of simplify our provider API to make the returned resources. So if you're generating, the Datadog provider or Azure provider or whatever provider you're generating, to make those returned resources easier to work with. So I think that was a really nice improvement. And then we also had the kind of net new, exciting experimental release of the AWS adapter that introduced compatibility with AWS CDK construct library. And that's the one I know Ansgar is going to go into more, so I won't cue that up too much. But yeah, just a lot of exciting things in 0.7 really.
Very nice. Yes, that was just curious. Can we give a shout out to the person who helped with the docs?
Yeah, so our tech writer, Laura, she's awesome. If you are in the Terraform community and you're on those repos, you've probably seen her all over the place. Like, 'cause she's a team of one working on the Terraform docs, which is a pretty like Herculean task, but you've probably seen her on a lot of PRs. Yeah, she did just really great work, was great to collaborate with. And yeah, anybody who works in software, I think you know how great it is to work with a fantastic tech writer. So it was really awesome to have her help.
It's good work, because where would we be without docs? Probably in some puddle of frustration somewhere, right? So before we get into the AWS adapter and the demo, I did have a question, just around the simplified provider API. I just wanted to ask, Daniel and Ansgar, what went into that from an engineering perspective?
A lot of time and caffeine. Was quite an effort. So the problem we had previously is, currently still is, if you have an API that uses blocks in Terraform, so like nested attributes, we translate that as a list, and that's like for us the right translation in the CDKTF land, but it comes with a cost because lists are really hard for us to handle because we don't have generics. It's super weird for us to work with lists, and you can't really, like, we can't really make them feel natural as of right now, like in the first iteration of it. So we thought about solutions to solve this. John did a really great PR, moving us in the direction of making everything class-based and working around this restriction by using a completely different API. We wanted to make the API in general feel super natural, like you would write a normal TypeScript class or like whatever Python class. And we decided to work with that API and instead go and see if we can improve what we have. So we found that instead of now doing the big shot and actually trying to improve the list themselves, we can see if we have lists that are not really actually lists. So Terraform has a lot of attributes that are just one time there at max, because it's just nesting, and we translate them as lists, but actually it's just a nested block. So we changed the interface we have, and now you can directly access these blocks. So instead of needing to access a list and using the Terraform functions to kind of get into there, if you have an object you can work with, you have an object that you can use for reference and so on. And that makes the API a bit easier to use and feel more natural, especially in cases where you have a lot of those. For example, the Kubernetes provider, where you have like spec and metadata and so on, and all these things are actually just one time there. They're never a second time there. You can now do just like my deployment.metadata.name and directly reference it, whereas before you had to do function.element, my deployment, what's never. So it's really, really nicer to use now.
Yeah, that does sound nicer.
And also nicer to write. So you don't have to do array brackets and then put an object in there, although those are just labels and they're only here a single time.
Very nice. Well, that does sound much better than the previous alternative. So that's some good work there. All right. So moving into the AWS adapter. So why don't we go just right into that? Because I know you have a demo that we're going to see here. So could we get a little bit of a upfront, here is what it is and what it's for in a nutshell before we hop in, Ansgar?
Yeah, can do that. So if you've seen the AWS CDK constructs, you know that they also have constructs which are often called layer 2 constructs. So for example, they extend the bare minimum of the properties you can set by methods that, for example, my all-time favorite example is s3bucket.grantRead, and then put any resource in there, and you would grant that resource access, for example, a Lambda function access to read from the S3 bucket. So, and Whereas if you would do it manually, you would need an IAM rule for the Lambda function. You would need some policy. The policy needs to contain the name of the S3 bucket and everything around that. And AWS built some great abstraction layers that users of the AWS CDK really enjoy. And yeah, we looked at them. We're like, oh, we want this. And I think in March, no, I only started in April, so it might not make sense. In April or May, I gave a talk at CDK Day, and it was also about how could we introduce something like that. And back then we had that was like an experimental different approach. Like, this is how we could write them, make them pluggable. But in the end, they already exist. So this AWS adapter, the tech preview we have, takes another approach. And the approach is converting the CloudFormation template that comes out of AWS CDK constructs to something that Terraform can work with. And the great thing was that AWS launched a new API called the AWS Cloud Control API. That's also supported by the Terraform AWS provider. And also there's a new Terraform AWS CC provider, which just uses only this Cloud Control API. And what it does is it offers you an API where you can put the same schema into that one and let it create the resource for you. So what this enables us to do is we can almost just take the CloudFormation and put it into some Terraform resource that will create that resource. There's a bit more magic or wrapping of things involved, but at the gist, that's it. And yeah, the AWS adapter is something that you can install as a separate package. Currently, it's TypeScript only. We haven't configured it to build for other targets yet. And yeah, the adapter, to use it, I think I would rather jump into the code to show you because it's easier than me explaining code, and I could just have shown it. So are there any other questions first?
I think that was a good heads up.
Anything to add?
Daniel, Sarah?
I guess I would just add, if anyone was following along with reInvent recently, you might have seen the launch of the Construct Hub, the AWS Construct Hub. So just to kind of emphasize what Ansgar is talking about the sort of like breadth of resources in the AWS CDK ecosystem. This is kind of what we're hoping to tap into. So it's exciting that there's so much sort of energy in the CDK ecosystem right now with people crafting these level 2 constructs to allow you to kind of add these abstraction layers. So I think that's where it's really exciting that Ansgar is doing this work now with the AWS adapter to kind of leverage, allow CDKTF applications to make use of this growing kind of community of constructs. So that's just a little add-on why I think it's exciting.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Totally forgot about that. Then yeah, I jumped into it and gonna share my screen here. So this is like the result pane, and this is the to-do pane. Yeah, so you can see VS Code, I hope. All right. So this is a CDK for Terraform TypeScript project, and the AWS adapter repository we have also has this as an example. So the code I'm having here. So as we know, for CDK for Terraform, we usually have the main TS file as an entry point. And I'm going to increase the font size a bit.
Perfect. I was just about to ask that.
It somehow doesn't want to do this by doing the usual zoom part. So I'm going to do the settings one. I think that is enough. I hope so. CDK for Terraform project usually has at least one stack. So that is an equivalent for Terraform to what you would have in a single Terraform state. And for this project, I installed the AWS CDK lib version 2, which was recently released as GA, I think on reInvent or a day after or something. And the @CDKTF AWS CDK package, which contains the AWS Terraform adapter we are talking about. And yeah, so to use the AWS CDK adapter, you instantiate it as any other construct because it's just another construct with a little bit of special code inside it. So that would be something for deep dive at some point. But from a user's perspective, you would instantiate the AWS adapter, and then you got it in your hand, kind of. And if you instantiate or use AWS CDK constructs, like, for example, from AWS CDK lib, I imported AWS Lambda, AWS step functions, and step functions tasks. And I'm going to instantiate an AWS Lambda.function. So this over here is code that you could have copied from your AWS CDK project. And I took this from a blog post about the AWS CDK because I had no AWS CDK code base flying around just yet. And the only difference that is in here is you pass it the AWS adapter as the context. So the function gets a scope where the construct is instantiated in. That's the same as for CDK for Terraform. And usually in TypeScript, you pass this, like the stack it's in, like we did here for the adapter. But for the AWS CDK constructs, we're going to tell them you live inside the adapter. So this way, Terraform, or the CDK for Terraform, has no clue about what's going on there. So it won't complain, oh, I don't know, what is this cloud formation? I can't get Terraform out of it on us. But what it rather will do is we'll just see this adapter and poke the adapter to tell it to, do something. And the adapter then will create Terraform resources under the hood for each AWS CDK construct it has. So what I'm having here is a Lambda function. I pass it some code and also function name and whatever you need, kind of. I got another one, which is called reverse ID, also with some code from the blog post that's also linked in the README in our example. And the AWS step functions task. So this one takes the Lambda function and returns payload. So what this does is it creates the step function definition. So this is deep into how step functions work and state machines at AWS. But this has these neat constructors that the AWS CDK constructs offer. So similar to S3 bucket.grantRead, we have some next that we can call and pass it step functions.wait task, I think. And then also a Lambda invoke afterwards. And what this does, I'll rather show you in the AWS console because that's more, it has a nice flow chart. So, and in the end, we pass this definition to the state machine and also give it some timeout. I think it was required. And and then we have the usual code like instantiating our stack that we have in an app and then doing the synth call. So this is what you would have in any other CDK for Terraform project. The only difference is that we now have also AWS CDK constructs, passing them the AWS adapter, and then doing also having this adapter in the project in the first place. And if I now do a CDKTF plan, or I will just go with deploy, so it will ask me, so we can have a look at it and we can save some time here. It will do a synthesize first. So in CDKTF.out stacks TypeScript step functions, we will have the CDK.tf.json file, which contains our resources. And as I mentioned, it uses the AWS Cloud Control API where it can. So that's another detail which we can talk about afterwards. But where is it? Here's AWS Cloud Control API resource. For example, there's the generate ID AWS Lambda function. So this is starting to look a bit like CloudFormation. And also the desired state that is passed. This is what I meant when I talked about the CloudFormation schema that we can use with the Cloud Control API. So in Terraform, you would have zip underscore file, and in CloudFormation, it's Pascal case. And yeah, so in the terminal, we can see that if we want to deploy this stack, it wants to create Cloud Control API resources. So one for the Lambda function, which generates an ID, one for reversing it, state machine, an IAM policy. This one is manually mapped, something I will go back to later, as I mentioned, and some others. So I'm just going to go ahead and say yes and let it create its thing. And while it works on it, I'm going to explain why we have, for once, time sleep and also other resources in there. So the AWS Cloud Control API does not yet support all resources that are available at AWS, but they are added over time. And so for the meantime, and that's also one of the reasons why this is still experimental or tech preview, we have to write custom mappings. We have docs on that, how to write some, also an example how to do so for DynamoDB tables. But if a resource is not yet supported by AWS Cloud Control API, we need to manually change or map the CloudFormation schema to the Terraform AWS resources. So the resources we have in the Terraform AWS provider. And yeah, to how we would do so and all of that, I will just leave this to the docs. And but that's why some of these resources are not AWS Cloud Control API resources, but rather AWS IAM role. So the good old AWS Terraform provider resource for an IAM role. And we ship some of those mappings, but there are others that we don't ship and that you might have to supply if you use it. And now it's done. And I'm going to have a look at the AWS console, go to step functions, and hopefully can see it. Oh, that's a very nice name there. And what I meant by having an easier look at it is this flowchart that we can see. It will generate an ID whenever it started, then it will wait a second, then it will reverse it. And we also can start an execution, pass it whatever it takes, and it doesn't look at the input. And it will then, generate an ID. I can already see output is some random ID ending with 4. And then it will wait a second, and it has done so. And then it will call reverse ID. And this one will take the 5.4 at the end and make it 4.5 and everything else. So that simple JavaScript snippet worked. So this is the resulting state machine we have here. And from the code perspective, we have this AWS construct or helper that lets us chain with next the parts of the state machine to build this thing. So we could also call other helpers or invoke other utilities that let us define things that happen in the state machine, and reuse what can be used in the AWS CDK. Yeah, I think I'm not going to talk about the time sleep. That's a workaround for eventual consistency, which is detailed for under the hood. And yeah, I will just leave this to the side. If you have the question why that needs to exist, I'm happy to explain it. And yeah, any questions on this right now?
I have just some more general questions for you, Ansgar.
Yeah.
So it seems like then kind of a takeaway is that when it comes to, because people will ask that, especially when it comes to the CDK, which one should I use? But this is a step forward so that doesn't have to be a question at all. And instead it is, you can use both. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a tech preview at the moment. So for example, I'm having inline code over here that doesn't need to be bundled. And the reason for that is with the AWS CDK, there are lots of utilities that helps you in handling assets. For example, if you want to run a Docker container somewhere, the AWS CDK can build it for you and also publish it to AWS ECR. And the problem with that is that's something that's not covered by CloudFormation, but rather by the AWS CDK itself. So this is something that we have to add support for. So we got a few issues open in our repo that I'll mention these kind of missing parts of niceties you get with the AWS CDK that you can't yet use with the AWS adapter. So there are restrictions to it. But if you use like plain, as far as that is concerned, plain constructs, most of them should work. If they use assets, for example, that is something that we have to ship support for. So that's still something like, this is why it's called a tech preview, and don't just jump on it and, oh, wow, this doesn't work. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, so it is a step in that direction, which is really good to know, because when you can have that conversation and say, well, the goal is to bridge the gap here. And as Sarah mentioned, being able to draw into those bigger ecosystems like the Construct Hub, that just gives you so many more options, and it goes from a competition to cooperation. So
yeah.
All right. Wonderful demo. Thank you for showing that. I know that whenever you dive into TypeScript land and you're talking about AWS, if you don't mention Lambda, then what are you doing? So it's good to a very relevant demo there. Nice. So that was our demo for the 0.7 AWS adapter. Sarah, would you, if you wouldn't mind, kind of give us a sort of a recap and the context for what we just saw there for moving forward? Because I feel like the power of that going forward should be reiterated at least one more time.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I think Ansgar was wise to reiterate, this is a tech preview. So this is sort of like the first step towards, this vision or goal of complete kind of compatibility or interoperability. So yeah, I think this is something that the team definitely is going to continue to invest in and work on. In terms of like the value of it, I think it's just, I think anyone, if you're familiar with Terraform, it's like the strength of Terraform really comes from the ecosystem. So it's not just about, I can use HCL, it's like I can use HCL with providers and modules and all these things. And I think CDKTF is just following in that same pattern. It's not just about, oh, I can write in TypeScript and that's kind of cool. It's really kind of, I think the power behind the tool eventually is going to be the way in which you can leverage all these different ecosystems. So you can not only eventually, like right now, you can use all the Terraform providers and modules. Eventually, it would be great if you could use, any construct that's out there. And so I think it's just following along in that same philosophy as how Terraform has evolved. Is just that we want to, just kind of grow with the ecosystem and have compatibility across all these resources. So yeah, I'm excited. I think that there's a lot of potential for the adapter going forward.
Nice. And Daniel, you have any thoughts? You haven't been we kind of had Ansgar take the whole light there, but
Yeah, no, I'm definitely super excited for the adapter. Really looking forward to using it myself sometime soon. So I think it's really awesome how many constructs the AWS CDK team has built and what like high-level abstractions they already built for all the tools and all the different little services in AWS and so on. So especially for someone like me who's pretty new to AWS itself, it's going to be really helpful to leverage this adapter and use the already existing constructs, but still be able to use different providers to stuff I want to do. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the progress there as well, because the opposite is I tend to have most of my experience in AWS, so it just helps me more. Nice. Okay, well, that brings us up to the present, right? We just got through 0.7. We just hit 0.8. I know that there was that minor release for 8.1. I didn't know if there was anything significant that we needed to dive into there. No. All right, cool. So if there is, you can interrupt me later. So the thing we wanted to do here towards the end, because this will be our final office hours of the year for the CDK for Terraform, was just behind the code, right? Behind the code and all of the crazy product kung fu that Sarah does for the team, and just get their ideas on what's going on behind it, how they're thinking, what they're doing going forward, and they're sort of a retrospective for the year. And so, something that I would love to know is just looking back over the past year, just from each of you. And I'd like to begin with Daniel, because it just RNG just went in my head and that's where we landed. So what was the most interesting technical challenge that you encountered throughout the year when working on the CDK for Terraform?
Oh, that's a really hard one. It's sort of a tie. So purely from the technical perspective, I would say it's the convert command, because to make it really interesting and meaningful, you have to kind of support everything that Terraform does to some degree in the first iteration, or at least make some good trade-offs there where you cut some corners and where stuff is a bit rougher. It was definitely super interesting to get it right, especially since like HCL is declarative language, so the order of statements doesn't really matter. You can shift stuff around. You can have a resource defined that's using a data source, and the resource defined before the data source is. It's all not really important to HCL, like to Terraform and to HCL, because it's inside of Terraform there's a graph build that follows like makes the execution plan, and then you have like the right order in which stuff can work and dependencies and so on. But if you build that into like a programming language, you have to have the right order, because if you want to access some local variable, it has to be there first, right? So that was definitely hard and interesting to build. And on the other end of it is the provider generation. Sebastian and John, and I think also Ansgar worked a bit on that. And there was like a lot of already existing work there, a lot of different nuances, different handlings of certain edge cases, and like a big new code base. And I wanted to have some substantial changes to it. This was like super hard to load all this context into it, because you like simultaneously program in 4 languages, sort of, because you have to think what an effect on TypeScript you write has on different languages like like Python and Java through JSI. And then you have to write a program that writes a program for writing programs that then write, and so on. It's kind of it's like super delayed in what you do. It's not like when building on like working the features on the CI, it's you do something, you press a button, you see a result, and here's like you think hard about something and then you do something, and then 4 hours later you kind of know, okay, these side effects were there. So definitely sparked some interest in writing more tests around that.
Nice. Yeah, I would imagine that was a good dive in. What about yourself, Ansgar? What was your big technical challenge of the year for the CDK?
I think it was the Go support, actually. So I've never really worked with Go. On a hackathon a bit, like copy pasting examples. That was it. And for the Go support, so JSI handles the code generation, everything. So what Daniel did for Convert was, or for the other parts, was nothing I had to take care of. But I needed to make sure that the code we generate works with the other Go code that the user writes, and so which we generate for provider bindings. And the issue there was that I had no knowledge at all about the Go module system, and it's, I think, very opinionated, which is a good thing if you know which opinion it has. And the docs itself were like, they were really good if you knew what you were doing, but I had a really hard time to get into this because I didn't care about how to write a while loop or something in Go. And every direction that I took was like, okay, this is all this basic stuff. And every example contains a little piece of how modules work. And I was like, yeah, I just want to know the modules. Give me Go for JavaScript developer. And maybe I haven't found the right resource there, but that was definitely interesting. But I got great support from others at HashiCorp that have a lot more Go knowledge than I could ever gain, probably. So that helped. And yeah, that was very interesting, but I also liked it a lot because it was deterministic in a way. So JavaScript dependencies sometimes get weird, but Go didn't. Was just weird in itself for some parts. So yeah, I enjoyed that a lot.
Nice. That's that's a good story. What about yourself, Sarah? What was your big technical challenge of the year?
Well, I mean, I joined the team 3 months ago, so my biggest challenge was probably learning to use the product, which I'm still in the process of doing. But what was really interesting just along the way as I'm kind of ramping up and getting onboarded was just starting to talk to users and just hearing a lot of different use cases and just learning more about the context people were working in was really interesting. So when I would get kind of stuck on my own, trying to learn the product, talking to other users was really helpful to help me kind of build up the context. So yeah, I would say that process is still ongoing as a challenge, but it's been fun.
Nice. And why don't we just stay on you for this next question that I wanted to get from the team here. And that was the biggest user/practitioner challenge that y'all have gone through. And this is obviously directly relevant to everyone in our live tuning. What is that big problem, and was it ever solved, or is it still something ongoing?
Well, I think that one interesting aspect of CDKTF is that it sits at the sort of center of a lot of different ecosystems. So it really depends, right? It's like someone could be using Python with AWS, they could be using TypeScript with Azure. There's so many different the right word, like combinations of sort of use cases, and they could be working in many different industries, right? And maybe they're on a core ops team, or they're on an applications team, or they're on a merge team. So I think the interesting thing about CDKTF, it's hard for me to say like this is the one problem, because there's just a pretty broad diversity of sort of how people are kind of interfacing with the product and the use case and things like that. So I think that it's hard for me to kind of pinpoint like this is the single challenge. But I think what I have been hearing from a lot of people is people are trying to work through on their teams sort of a shift towards a more integrated style of developing applications. And so when I say integrated, like integrating the sort of infrastructure provisioning with the application development and the sort of business logic. So that's a core kind of like use case problem that I feel like people are just approaching generally. And CDKTF in some ways is helping them with that. So that's been really interesting to kind of learn more about just that sort of like those two kind of concerns starting to merge and fuse together a bit.
Nice. So kind of a problem is that there are many problems because of the fact that it covers so many different bases, so many different languages, permutations of the languages with the cloud providers and the like. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's problem and opportunity.
Yeah, right. What about yourself, Daniel? So obviously you've got the technical problems and the like, but during the year, was there any big user or practitioner challenge that you saw, maybe in a GitHub repo, or just something you saw from just seeing so many that you found interesting?
Yeah, so I think there are a ton of interesting issues and ton of stuff to work on. I think one of those things I struggled a bit with is side effects. So I wanted to have a cool demo where I build like a Docker image, push it to ECR, and then do something with it. I wanted to have the Docker image built automatically, not like doing a hand push and then running CDKTF. I want to have it in CDKTF. And I did that with like a null resource and a provisioner that built the image, and then I had some from the Docker provider, some stuff that got the image then in and pushed the to ECR and so on. So that was a bit, that was too much fiction in my opinion, and that got me thinking, and got a lot of issues around that as well, about CDKTF as a more like integration tool between different things. So some folks frame it as I want to use CDKTF as a library and run CDKTF deploy from my Node.js code or something because they want to do something before and something after. Some frame it as they want to have a way to have these sort of side effects like lifecycle hooks or post-deploy steps they could run or something like that. And I think finding a good API that's going to be super tough, but I think having something there, like having good API in the end, is going to make the tool so much more valuable and make it feel much more integrated into the everyday developers' workflows.
Please tell me when y'all tackle the post-apply problem. I would love to know. Sometimes I feel like I'm locking my keys in the car and I'm like, how do I get back in? Need to do something afterwards. Nice. And so what about yourself, Ansgar? Surely there's been a user or a practitioner challenge and you're like, I need this. And you're like, what the heck? So what about for you?
Yeah, most of them, or those I encountered or could think of, the users already helped themselves. So there was just minor guidance required. But the biggest user challenge I kind of built for myself, which I found interesting, of course, because I built an end-to-end serverless example to get a feel for how one would do so. And we always had this topic of cross-stack references. And in that example, I connected a Lambda function, which served as an API, and some front end, which is behind the CDN and statically hosted. And for cross-stack references, as the example in TypeScript was just code, I built something that worked. And what I found really interesting is that it's a quite similar approach to what Daniel recently did when he did a first draft as cross-stack references. So how we might tackle that in the CDKTF itself, so it doesn't need to be solved in the user land. So that's something I found quite also nice to see that, okay, that's how we could do it. And yeah, so that's something I think also some other users probably would have come up with behind the scenes. So because they, of course, have the same problems. Some have asked about this. And from a more general perspective, what I really like to look at, that's not a challenge, but rather inspiration, is to have a look at the GitHub feature where you can look for other projects or repositories depending on your code base. So you can scroll through a list of other open source projects. For example, Pocket is in there, but we've talked about that a lot. And there are also other tools that are built with the CDK for Terraform. I found it quite inspiring to have a look at them, like, oh, wow, I didn't even know this existed. So that's something that is to this regard.
That is a very good point. I hadn't thought about that, because as for any existing third-party constructs for the CDK for Terraform, how does one currently go about finding those?
Want to go for it, Sarah?
When you say like third party, you basically mean like community sort of.
Yeah, community.
Yeah, I mean, I think the you could sort of do a search on your favorite package manager like npm or something like that. But I think that what AWS has released recently with their construct hub is probably the best, most centralized location. Now that is, as would make sense, mainly focused around the AWS, sort of provisioning ecosystem. So, our team builds about 20 of our most popular Terraform providers, the sort of pre-built L1 constructs that you can find. But I think that will probably be kind of a exciting story for the next year, is sort of like, how does the community kind of develop around building constructs? And the Pocket team has been really generous to share their time with us, and they've shared like their constructs that they've built, and those can also be found in their repo, and I believe also on Construct Hub. But yeah, I think that will be kind of an exciting thing to see in the near term, is sort of how more and more folks kind of maybe creating more generalized constructs that would make sense outside of just their own really specific implementation. Yeah, so if you're interested in building one, we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, kind of excited to see where that goes.
Nice. Well, it looks like in the middle of our questions, we found a pretty neat thing for 2022. All right, cool. So then the last question I have for y'all is less of a technical and product question, and more just a team question, just for y'all, just to vent maybe, or maybe not vent, maybe to brag. But what have been the biggest developments for you as a team? Because a lot of people may or may not know there's some radical time zone differences between Sarah, Ansgar, and Daniel. And I know that's always been interesting. But beyond us being, across the globe from each other, what have been those developments within the team? Workflows, just maybe new decisions in the technology you guys do stuff. What's inside of the black box that produces the factory? How are things changing?
Well,
should I go or no?
No, you can go first.
I wanted to say, should I go famously first? Because that's always the back and forth between Daniel and me, as I mentioned previously. You mentioned it already, change, kind of. So we evolve our processes we have. For example, when I started, I think almost nothing was automated in regards to our release process. But there were probably some bits automated, and still now it's not fully automated yet, but it didn't need to be, kind of. If we get into a cadence where we release every few minutes, then we might need to do so. But that's something that I really like about the way we approach problems, like iteratively, just like a good way forward first, and just evolve as we go. And yeah, that's something that for me characterizes the team also, because yeah, with everything that works or works not, we will change the way we approach issue prioritization and everything. So I really like that.
All right, nice. And so, Daniel, following up for that, if you were to suddenly be airdropped into another team, what are y'all doing right now that you would want to see also brought with you?
So I think what I would miss the most was we do a lot of these ad hoc ID exchanges and kind of huddles on problems, both synchronously and asynchronously. And I think that's really some fun. So at a time when I worked this provider stuff where we do these direct accessing to the objects and so on, what I talked about earlier. Like if you're so deep in the trenches, you kind of only see stuff you need to change in the long run, and it's kind of feels like you have to do like 100 things, and you're not getting along any further because like this blocks this and this depending on this and so on. And yeah, we had some great huddles and found like really good steps we could take to mitigate the problem. For example, like there was some really deep problem when everything worked fine, but if you have somewhere in your resource schema there's a dist, everything broke. And we just removed the workflow. So it was only occurring when you pass down an entire block to a resource, and that's something you seldomly do actually. And we knew that this restriction is actually going to be lifted when we do a different change we plan to do on later. And the trade-off was really, really good one. I think same goes for, like, this was like a problem I had, and like really tactical, but also like strategically when we talk about long-term vision or what we want to work on next, we all have like slightly different perspectives, and that really helps to be a bit more safe with your assertion and with your opinion in the end, because it's a bit vested from different perspectives. Like, I'm coming from some application engineer perspective with like little cloud knowledge prior. Ansgar and Sebastian have both been in the cloud ecosystem for a while now, so we all have a bit different angles to the problem.
Nice. Yeah, I got to get the 360 perspective, gives a clear picture, right? What about you, Sarah? Last on our answering the question here for the developments on the team.
Well, I think it's interesting to like, it's good timing to do a year in review for CDKTF, because it is, such a new team. I mean, Sebastian couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but he joined HashiCorp as a full-time employee last January. So he's just coming up on his 1 year mark here. And he mentioned before this meeting that it's been really interesting for him to see the project transition from being driven by external contributors to an internal team. So he was actually working and contributing, CDKTF extensively prior to joining the company. So I think that was one thing I wanted to call out from his takeaways, was just, it's been a big shift for the product to kind of go from just pure open source external folks to actually an internal dedicated team. And I think it's been exciting to see the team grow, with Ansgar and Daniel both joining in the spring, and then it was great for me to have the opportunity to come on board in September as the first product manager. And I think, just from my brief time on the team, it's fun to work on a team that is still new and kind of young and very open and flexible. I feel like it's nice to kind of be in a space where, I think Daniel mentioned, like, there's just lots of communication and flexibility to kind of jump in and figure out how to make things work. So yeah, that's been fun for me. And I think it's cool to see CDKTF kind of going into the new year now with kind of like an established team and sort of ramped up to really do a lot of exciting work in the coming year. So yeah.
Nice. That was an interesting move, right? From going external contributors to an internal team. I haven't even thought about that. I would love to hear his deeper thoughts on what that workflow prior looked like to now. So we'll have to get him on here at some point.
And we do still have some really, amazing external contributors. I know folks who have seen maybe these community office hours in the past. We've had John join us, and there are lots of people still really valuable contributing outside the company. But yeah, it's nice that the product has kind of a home base here internally to commit to it.
Yeah, nice. Well, any other comments here for our final end 2021 retrospective here? All right. Well, then, if not, I do want to end on the infamous/famous question, because every time we ask it, things have changed, so it's going to get a little different. But the most popular question by and far of 2021, for me at least, is when do I use the CDK for Terraform over a Terraform? It doesn't matter. And I would like to get this directly from the team right here at the end of 2021 with all the new information, all the things you all have done, and all the times you've answered it. You guys are probably like really on top of answering this question. So shall we begin? When should I use the CDK for Terraform over normal Terraform?
I mean, I think to kind of boil it down to the simplest answer is like CDKTF is a really good fit either maybe or when you have a really strong preference to use, a procedural language, like you have just a really strong preference maybe on your team to just stick with writing Python, then this is a nice fit. Or when you really need the ability to create abstraction layers to manage complexity in a way that you just don't feel like you can do in HCL. So I think those are two cases where CDKTF is a great option. In a lot of cases, if you are already familiar with using HCL, you don't have that need on your team to stick with a programming language. And if it's suiting your needs, you're not blocked in any way, then, by all means, keep using HCL. I think the cool thing about this question is that the choice can really be made on like a project by project basis. Since CDKTF can interoperate with all the existing Terraform providers and modules, it could be like a team by team, project by project choice. It's definitely not a one-way door or anything like that.
That was perfect, because I was actually going to ask that as my next question. Do I have to completely switch to CDK if we're already in Terraform? And the answer is you can use them both together, right? So great.
Yeah, and we've talked with people where that's what works best for them. Like an apps team might want to use CDKTF, and then they're just passing along that synthesized JSON to kind of the established, centralized workflow for working with Terraform. So we've definitely kind of heard from people who are using that hybrid approach.
And Ansgar and Daniel, did y'all have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I also recently got to know that there are also people using the CDK for Terraform to generate Terraform modules, because our output can be used by Terraform. And if you include variables and outputs in it, you can use that result as a Terraform module and use it with HCL. So you can even go a layer below that or change it in any direction, actually. So just wanted to call that out, because that's also a possibility that is used. So quite cool.
Nice. Yeah, just noticed that. Nice. Well, Daniel, what about yourself? Any other thoughts on that question?
I think that was probably answered by both of them. All
right, great. Well, I guess that brings us here to the closeout. Thank you all so much for all the work, the blood, sweat, and tears that y'all put into the CDK for Terraform. It is, when I came in, at least earlier this year, it was at a very different state than it is from now, both technically and also publicly in terms of buzz factor. Like I said, at reInvent, we had Taylor Dolezal and Kyle Ruddy give a very fabulous talk at reInvent that was overflowing with attendance. I had a lot of people come up and talk to me about it, and it's incredible to see the strides you have made. So good job. Even if no one else says it, I know that it was a great job. So yes. So we've said it on our earlier streams, but if anyone in the audience is just getting started with the CDK for Terraform, please check out our Learn platform at learn.hashicorp.com. We've got a ton of getting started guides there for the CDK and a lot of other resources. We've got a lot of other resources on GitHub as well, including our own GitHub repositories that you can check out for examples and your own learning purposes. And as always, if you have any feedback, go to the GitHub repo, leave us an issue. We do read them. We read them, right? No, we read them. So it's the best way to get heard and make sure that what you're looking to get into it makes its way into there. And we have links to all of those things, all of those resources below the video. Okay, so that wraps up community office hours for the CDK for Terraform in 2021. Any final words before we jump into the happy holidays? Ansgar, Daniel, and Sarah.
I'm not good at answering such questions under pressure.
No, but thanks for hosting us, Cole, and letting us kind of walk down memory lane, think through everything from this year. It was fun to get to look back, and yeah, really, like you said, it's really cool to see the progress on the product. And yeah, I feel proud of the team going through this list of everything we talked about today. So yeah, thanks.
For sure. And then Daniel, we got to hear at least one thing from you finally, right?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hear your assessment next year. after the year, if you still moved along in the right direction for you. Look forward to that.
Nice. All right. Thank you for everyone in the audience for tuning in, and for everyone who's watching this at a later date. Happy holidays, and until next year.